Alright, what's up everybody? Welcome back to Natural Light Bodybuilding. Today we've got a sick Q&A. Only good questions today. Anybody that didn't ask a good question for this one, I hate to say it, but you got reported and blocked on my Instagram, so no more dumb questions, and we'll be basically smooth sailing moving forward. So, really good Q&A. I got about 10 or 12 questions. I'm pumped for this one. This is the first time I've done notes for one too, so it won't even just be thoughts off the top of my head. It'll be like a regular video for like each question, so a bunch of like mini videos all compiled into one. It's sick. What else can I say? So before I get into the first question, I do have to give a shout out to Barbell Apparel. It's November, so it's Black Friday. Any pants, jeans, chinos, covert pants, all of them are 99 bucks. Check the link in my description. You can see everything I wear. Got the black jeans on now. If I have the mobility to get them up, my favorite pants, I wear them pretty much as often as I possibly can without having to do a whole ton of laundry. So I love them. Check them out. First question for the Q&A, how to balance training enjoyment and optimal movement. So this is something where, generally speaking, I tend to prefer training optimally because for me, the enjoyment is the results. And you can say that's shallow and you're not getting a whole ton of depth out of bodybuilding. But for me, ultimately, the way I see it is I'm here to get results, and I can suffer a little bit for an hour in the gym 5 times a week and enjoy the results, the better results, the rest of my life, right? So that's how it works in my brain personally. Of course, in the process, you do find lifting to be fun. It's somewhere you can get into a flow state. It's somewhere you can push yourself and just get the hormones going, get the human spirit going, and you feel great in the gym, so you learn to love it. So ultimately, what I would say here is enjoying your training does become important at certain times. If you find that the results are slow or they're not overriding the dreadfulness of a boring gym session, there are ways to spice it up. So there's a few things that I'd look out for here to try and prioritize. The first one, as I kind of hinted at earlier, it is going to be the flow state. The flow state is something where you can get into a good groove with what you're doing. You stop thinking and you just go. When you're in the gym, you want to be able to do just that. You want to start off your session doing something you enjoy, something you're excited to do, whether it's more strength or number oriented, where you can get like a tangible, I added a rep, I'm excited to lift this amount of weight, something along the lines of that, or it's like, I can't wait to get the sensation of that discomfort locally in my pecs when I do my first set of dips. I'm just pumped to do that regardless of how much weight I'm lifting. You want it to be fun, so no matter what kind of gets you going, as long as it gets you some type of results, you want to try and get that into your training at some point. Of course, there's always going to be that dirty work you have to do, the stuff you don't enjoy that does drive your progress, but find ways to sprinkle in something like the flow state. If you can just get moving in your workouts, if you can stay focused, leave your phone in your bag, turn your phone off, lock your apps, use the app Focus Lock. Not sponsored, it's $10 a month, it locks your apps. It's awesome. I use it for most of my workouts and anytime I'm doing client check-ins. Beauty of an app. Helps a ton. The next thing here, hard work becomes fun rather than dreadful when you're in that flow state. So when you're doing something that you don't enjoy that is hard, it sucks, no matter how hard it actually is. Like for a lot of us, emptying the dishwasher, like one of the easiest physical tasks you can do, is difficult to do because it's boring. So if you can make something enjoyable, it becomes fun no matter how hard it is. It's like, how do you think people get into running marathons? They bring themselves to actually enjoy the process, and they get into that flow state, and pushing themselves becomes fun in its own way. So no matter how physically demanding it is, you can make it fun if you come at it from the right perspective. Next thing I'd say is that this kind of brings the spirit back to lifting. You get a lot of people that are almost a little bit too much into their own heads. You can even say that about me to an extent, although I do genuinely enjoy results and the aesthetics of bodybuilding and the lifestyle that comes with it, probably more than most people do, I would say. But being able to enjoy your training and get to that flow state brings kind of that spiritual side. It brings the human spirit out in your workouts. And that's not the most objective thing, but we can all kind of tell, like, when you're in the zone, when you're in the groove, there's like that just enjoyment that you get out of being in a state of mind like that, and it's fun. Like, I'll touch more on this later, but I just got back from, I've been traveling a bunch and I've been out of my routine. And every time I get back into it, when I haven't lifted in a bit and I haven't listened to music that I like in a bit, and I get back into it, I'm just vibing. I'm not thinking, I'm just in the zone, and it's fun. It's a great feeling. So if you can get into that, it's good stuff. Ultimately, I would say, focus on your results too. You can't just go do something you enjoy because that's not productive. You got to have both. The next question: was there any point in your lifting journey where getting big felt hopeless? I'd say there's been a few points where getting big has felt hopeless. There's been basically three main points. I would say when I first started, I was 17, give or take a year. I want to say I was 17 when I started lifting, and I was kind of your classic, like, teenager that was, like, kind of doom and gloom, like, why does everything bad happen to me? Like, we've all kind of been there. Like, I was 17. It's kind of just how you are. I mean, it's not like I was 13 and I was, like, even more extreme in that mindset, but I still had bits and pieces of that. I had a lot of self-doubt. I was like, I don't have the genetics for it. I'm never going to be able to get big. So one of my initial factors of motivation was to prove myself wrong. It was to prove that doubt wrong, and at least be able to train out of resentment for the fact that I wasn't big and that I didn't think I could get big. And whether that was the right or wrong way to go about it, it ended up working because that gave me a chip on my shoulder, and I think that's pretty much the biggest reason why I was so successful early on in my lifting career. Of course, I got humbled within a couple of years, and I've changed everything since then. Obviously, the way I train and the way I approach training from like a philosophical and just psychological standpoint, but there's no doubt that I had a little bit of self-doubt, and I didn't really think I just didn't have any hope. I would also say when I got to the end of my power building phase, this is after a few years of training already, I'd made excellent gains, and then I just hit a wall, like, so incredibly hard. And this is around the time where the majority of influencers in fitness social media, just the fitness community in general, it was very doom and gloom. It was kind of at the peak of like Greg Doucette's time, and all these influencers were talking about the natural limit. And looking back, they just didn't really train that well. And it was kind of a self-imposed limit, whether it was because they weren't smart enough to program around it, or they were using it as a cop-out to hop on TRT or something. Everybody kind of had their own incentives to lower the standards a little bit. So I kind of recognized that eventually I realized I was the crazy one. Like, I'm the one that doesn't want any of the BS or excuses. Like, I actually do want to keep going, and I'm going to have to just come at it from a different approach than what most people are going to view training as, even those like biggest influencers. So I had to overcome that. And that was, I was hopeless for a while, about a year or so. And then I started to kind of like figure things out. I truly reflected on my training, and a lot of the reflections that I gathered and thought of at that point were, and they still are, a lot of the principles I discuss on my channel, especially how my channel started. So that was cool. And then I would say even as recent as this past year, like ever since the Road to 18-inch Arm series ended, I would say I felt not necessarily entirely directionless, but I've almost assumed in some weird way, subconsciously, that I'm not able to get any bigger, and that's led me to a place of complacency for a long time now, which isn't something I've discussed on the channel. Like, I'm still interested in lifting, I'm still lifting regularly, but I have been much more complacent for this past year until very recently when I started this full body, almost everyday type of approach, which has been really fun, and it's kind of sparked my love for training again. I've seen little bits and pieces of progress. Not to brag, but I did hit 115 for 6 on preacher curls, which looking back is an all-time PR, and it's with the stricter form too. And yeah, that was to brag. No, I'm just kidding. But either way, little things like that are just little hints of progress. And I'm like, okay, well, if my form is better and I hit this PR and I'm like 20, 25 pounds lighter now than I was when I was doing 115 for 5 at the Road to 18-inch Arm series, then that's fun, that's cool. It means that what I'm doing is working. So I'm enjoying that. I'll discuss more about this pretty soon too. I'll keep that series going. So those are kind of the main phases where I have felt that getting bigger is a bit hopeless, and I think those phases are inevitable because you are going to be humbled at various times in your lifting journey. But the cool part is when you stick through it and you just realize that more is always out there, and eventually you get to a point where you have to think outside of the box and push through, or push beyond, I should say, what most people are going to be telling you to do. Next question: why does everyone kelso shrug in the frontal plane despite it being more optimal in the scapular plane? So this is a very straightforward question, not very it's just it's a very straightforward, just very objective question. So the reason why I picked this one is because he is correct. Kelso shrugs and shrugging variations generally are going to be better in the scapular plane or somewhere close to that. Kelso shrugs, the reason why they're in the frontal plane is because they are a reductionist approach to rows, and that's one of the issues that I have with most of the fitness industry being very lift oriented rather than physique or muscle oriented. They look for ways to change the lift rather than looking at the muscle group first and then making the lift based on that. So when it comes to shrugs, I would say the reason why most people do Kelso shrugs is because it's been reverse engineered out of rows, and it's been looked at from a lift first, physique second type of perspective. But I would also say that just from a practicality standpoint, with most equipment designed for rowing rather than scapular plane shrugging, it just makes sense that most people are going to discover that first. So in order to kind of counter this, one of the things you can do is do a cable shrug, and bonus points if you have a functional trainer, where you can just create your own stability by doing these bilaterally. If you're going unilaterally, it does get a little awkward unless you have something to hold on to with your with your non-working arm. So give them a try. They feel great. I've done them here and there throughout my lifting career, but I've never stuck to them consistently because, one, I don't really think of them all that often, and two, the setup is it takes a little more creativity. So very possible and very worth it, I'd say, for a lot of people. Next question: paths for advanced lifters. How does an advanced lifter continue to progress, and what should you do, basically? What I would say here is, when you're an advanced lifter, think outside the box. It should be freeing to realize that most advice online no longer applies to you. What you're going to see from the most popular videos, the most popular channels, the most popular forums online, it's all going to be advice that is catered to the lowest common denominator. And there's good reason for that a lot of the time. It's going to help the most people, at least in theory. I have arguments against how that actually goes in practice, because I think when you need to constantly tell people basic advice, it just says that they're usually not following that basic advice, and just telling them that more and more is just going to be redundant. It takes a switch in their own head to flip, basically. Like, you can't, no matter how many times you tell someone to train hard, train hard, train harder, train harder than last time, train harder, train harder. It's like, you can keep beating a dead horse, but it just takes them to wake up. You can't just tell somebody to train harder and then they go instantly do it. In the vast majority of cases, they say, oh no, I am training hard, then they realize they're not, and then that, then it kind of just goes from there. So what I'd say here, try things out that are unconventional, because you are free now. You no longer have to follow that train each muscle twice a week, do 3 sets, do that one lift, train to 0 RAR, and there's nothing wrong with that. That is easily the best way to just straight shot it to getting jacked, and I love that approach, like, for the vast majority of people. But when you're advanced, then you're for the most part in uncharted territory. The odds of you ever meeting another jacked advanced natural lifter in real life is incredibly slim. I'd say it's even rare to see like a legit, like, late stage intermediate natural lifter in real life. Like, there's pretty much maybe one at every gym, and that's not even at all gyms, I would say. So nobody's making videos giving you advice. Nobody's telling you what to do. Nobody's as big or as jacked as you for the most part. So you are free. You have to kind of create your own path. So you no longer have to follow dogmas. You no longer have to follow mainstream advice. You can try things outside of the box. And that's exactly the reasoning for me trying this full body everyday approach. Like, for me, are my joints and my tendons strong enough at this point through training for 8 or 9 years straight? where I can handle that and I know exactly what my volume tolerances are and I have excellent technique and I know how to make lightweight feel heavy on every lift. Like, with all those boxes checked, can I get away with training full body every day? And I would say, like, yeah, I mean, probably. Like, you have to obviously go figure that out, but it's kind of cool to be able to take those low risk experiments that could pay off really high. So I'd say trying new things and thinking outside of the box when you're advanced, it's always low risk, because at worst you're just going to maintain and your progress was pretty slow anyways. And the reward is moderate, I would say. You can continue to make progress, and decent progress at any rate when you're advanced is objectively good. And it can just make you fall in love with training again, and just kind of it turns into a snowball effect where you just keep learning new things, you keep experimenting with new things, and certain barriers that used to kind of prop up in your mind start to get broken down. So full body every day. Try things like time under tension. I know it's been debunked, but these things are all based on like what's worked for beginners. So when you're advanced, try things like that. Whether science says it works or not, who cares? Try things like time under tension. Try things like constant tension. Try implementing more aggression in the way that you lift, and if you typically lift in a cheaty, aggressive, kind of all-out type of way, like how most power builders typically do, try using more control and going stricter. Try things like intentionally slow concentrics, and I'm not going to sit here and say those definitely work, but when I've tried them, they feel incredible. So things like that are all worth doing. Next question: how does training change the more advanced you get? The first thing here is that your systemic and local fatigue do go up. You're using a lot more weight. You have a bigger muscle that's doing more overall work. It requires more out of you. It's very fatiguing. Systemically, you're lifting more weight. You are training harder. You are able to train harder. It's just more taxing overall. So lifting, as you get bigger, does get a lot harder, and that is why most people don't stick with lifting for the super long term, or why they get stuck on the earlier stages of lifting. It's simply because it gets harder. I would also say here, everything's max effort, so you need a strong intrinsic or internal drive and purpose for training in your life. Once training becomes so hard that it starts to become dreadful, you have to find ways to make it fun. So fun's not even the word I want to say here. You have to find ways to make it meaningful. You could say enjoyable, but also meaningful. It has to align with your outlook on life to make it worthwhile, in my opinion. So the example I have here, and I'm sure you can tell after I say this that I've been getting into the philosophy rabbit hole, especially with Nietzsche, reading Genealogy of Morals, as some of you saw in the comments of my most recent video. You could say something along the lines of, for example, the modern world caters to the weak and assumes moral superiority by default over the strong. Lifting is a way I overcome that and rebel against it in some fashion. So you look at the modern world, always catering to the weak, and I'm not necessarily saying there's anything wrong with helping people in need or helping people that are in vulnerable positions, but what I'm saying is when you look at the way you or anybody really in this modern world views people's morals and who holds moral superiority, the default option is that people who are weak and people who are maybe in these vulnerable positions are automatically morally superior, when we don't even know those people personally, and we automatically assume people that are strong, generally speaking, are not good people. They're morally inferior, and they take advantage of people to get to the position that they're in. And I think when you look a little bit deeper into that, these are all people that you don't necessarily know. And of course, you can't say that the rules should be, or the perspectives on each person or each group of people should be inverted or anything. I'm not trying to make any claims of that, but it starts to kind of get you to think like, is the world kind of fighting against you becoming the best version of yourself? And it just gets you to think a little bit more. So that's a quick example that I got from Nietzsche. I think it's very interesting. It's a cool perspective on the world and how it all works. So I would say having something, whether it's that perspective or something that resonates with you or something that you believe, having a philosophy for why you're doing what you're doing just makes it that much more valuable to you. Because if you don't hold any value and you have no purpose for why you're doing it in the first place, it just becomes really hard, and then you're more likely to give up and just spend your time doing things that are ultimately kind of meaningless, but maybe very pleasurable in the short term. Next question, do you believe the more effort you put in, the more you get out, bodybuilding specific? So, quick answer to this is yes. Muscle growth is intensity based, so all training variables should be programmed to support intensity. When you look at the way a muscle grows, it grows from having as many fibers as you can possibly activated. That is what gets a muscle to grow. If a muscle is only working at half capacity and you're not training close to failure, or you're just doing a task that doesn't require your muscle to be trained close to failure, what reason would it have to grow? You have to force adaptations. They don't just occur because you went to the gym or like happen to move your muscle in a certain way. So your training variables should support intensity. When you look at training variables that reduce intensity, like going for super high volume, you're not able to focus or push as hard on every set. When you look at things like prioritizing too strict of technique, where you're too focused on controlling the weight than you are actually pushing that muscle, or even things like using lifts that are very unstable, you're just opening up more doors to tension leaking away from the target muscle. None of those variables support your intensity. So what you have to do is find an appropriate amount of volume. I'm not saying go low volume or go for like HIT or anything, but an appropriate amount of volume where you get a mix of both and you can support your intensity. When your exercise selection prioritizes the muscle you're trying to train and allows you to put intensity towards that muscle without it leaking into other areas, that supports your intensity. When you look at things like overall stability, that's a huge one, and that all allows you to train intensely and get the most you can out of each set. The next thing I'd say here is it has to be a directed effort. So when you're talking about just blanket statement, overall effort, how hard was training, just because something is harder systemically doesn't necessarily mean it's more potent for growth. And I think that's something some people still have to kind of wrap through their heads, because you could do something like Olympic weightlifting or sprints or things that are just super systemically demanding that aren't as beneficial or potent from a local standpoint. So it has to be a directed effort. Something just being or feeling harder doesn't mean anything if it's not locally harder. So it's like you could say a chin-up is harder systemically. It's more challenging. When I do a set of chin-ups to failure, I feel like I did more. It felt more difficult than a set of preacher curls to failure, but who's getting bigger biceps? The guy doing chin-ups or the guy doing preacher curls? And I think the answer is probably pretty obvious there. So it has to be a directed effort, and then that's when it matters most. When in a lifting journey can you ethically offer coaching, for the next question? My answer to this, and it's going to be somewhat vague, but everybody will go through this experience, so you'll basically understand it at some point in your lifting journey. It's when you've been humbled and you've overcome that to keep growing. You have a genuine sense of direction to help guide other people. So what I mean by this is, you look at the beginner lifters that have the Dunning-Kruger effect. They either learn just enough to be able to grasp some form of direction in their training. They think they know everything, or they do something that gets them a little bit of results and they think they know everything there is to know. That's cool and all, and that's good for the time being. But eventually, when you hit that plateau, you're going to realize you don't know anything. And this kind of happens to everybody in every part of life, where you think things are going well, and then when a problem arises, you have no confidence and you realize you don't know anything. You can say like, oh yeah, I know exactly what frequency I need, I know exactly what volume I need, all this basic stuff, but you'll get to a point where when that stops working, you're like, oh boy, okay, maybe I don't know as much as I thought I did. And when you reach that point, that's a huge milestone. It's cool because now you're going to learn more and you're going to get bigger than most people, because most people don't get through that. When you hit that point and then you spend time stuck, you spend time spinning your wheels, and you break through that, that's how you start to be able to get that experience to start coaching people. So for people that have been following the channel, you will know my experience with this. I started off lifting in the high frequency trend, and I was like, okay, well, if I'm training a muscle 3 or 4 times a week, I'll get it to grow. I know that's the most important variable because that's what Jeff Nippert says is the most important variable right now. And he's science-based and everybody else is a bro. I know what I'm talking about. I'm smarter than everybody. Look, I'm even getting bigger than everybody too. And then I plateaued and I'm like, okay, wow, like maybe I don't know as much as I thought I did. And then from there, I started to create my own direction. When you're just copying other people, copying the consensus, that works for a while, and then you'll realize that you need to learn more and more and more. And at that point, once you create your own direction and it works, and you can explain it, and you can make things tangible, and talk about it in a video like the way I do, or explain it to a friend in the way that I discuss these topics in video, you'll be able to actually not just know what to do, but be able to articulate it in a way that a potential client could understand and benefit from. So that's what I would describe as an appropriate time to start coaching people. Does progressive overload happen automatically? If so, why do you need a logbook? It generally does happen automatically. I've made this point before in previous videos. And your progression systems should typically follow on an algorithm that tells you when to add weights so you don't second guess yourself. So the main thing here is if you're taking a bodybuilding approach that is intensity first and your goal is to train to 0 RIR, you're creating stimulus. When you train to 0 RIR this week, that might leave you at 6 reps of 225 on Smith Larson press. When you train to 0 RIR in 2 weeks, it might lead you to 7 reps, therefore your progression is automatic. The progression scheme that you follow functions as an algorithm to allow you to add weight without having to second guess or overthink when to add weight. You're not relying on things like feel, you're relying on things like objective measures. When your set hits 8 reps, then you increase weight by 5 pounds, simple as that. So when your 0 RIR becomes 8 reps, you add weight the next week, you go to 230, rinse and repeat. Simple as that. So why do you need a logbook? Well, one, I would say you need a logbook for hindsight. You're going to forget each training week. You're not going to be able to remember what exactly you did on every lift 3 months ago. And that is going to be valuable information for detecting plateaus before they actually become a legit issue. Minimizes your time not making progress. So one, that's very important. Two, I would say it provides accountability. Since we tend to be routine oriented and pick the safe weight, we like to do things we know we can do. Trying to do more than we've done before invites the risk of failure, which will lower your overall mood. So if you're doing 225 for 3 sets of 5 on Smith bench, you're going to feel attached to that since you know you completed it, you know it felt good. That increases your likelihood of wanting to repeat that same performance next week. So sometimes that comfort of just doing something that you know you can do and getting that little win or that little dopamine hit of being successful in the gym, that will override your logic of actually trying to train to failure, because training to failure, when you look at things maybe a little bit too objectively, it can be disappointing. Ultimately, what you should realize is that as long as your effort was high, training to failure is actually kind of a win, but our minds don't always work like that. So you kind of have to think about it. You have to think it through to understand that failing can actually be a very good thing sometimes in bodybuilding. I'm not saying to just go to failure on everything because I don't actually believe in that, but it's just one thing where your subconscious might override your own logic, and a lot of beginners are very susceptible to that. They stick to the same weight, they feel comfortable at it, they know they can do it, so it feels good to go in and do it, and they don't have that drive to push for more, but also potentially take a subconscious L along with it, if that makes sense to you. Next question, view on music during your workouts. My opinion on music is that it's a tool like a pre-workout. You should use it sparingly because you become numb to it, you build up a tolerance to it. For me, music becomes something that in a raw, fresh state of mind that is detrained from the effects of music, it's a potent tool. There's nothing like kind of just vibing out to a music or a song or an album or playlist that resonates with you and just getting in the zone. It almost puts you in that flow state, and I think that's huge. What I'd say here is, as time goes on, especially if you're lifting often and listening to music each time you lift, you're going to build up a tolerance to that music. It becomes mundane, you get used to it, it doesn't have that same effect. And eventually, you just need that music to get to that baseline over time, same thing with or similar concept you could say to caffeine or pre-workout, eventually it just loses all of its magic and it just kind of becomes your baseline. And from there, I find that music actually annoys me if I listen to it for a few weeks in a row. You just get sick of it, listening to the same thing every single day when you're lifting. If your lifting is hard, then your brain starts to associate certain songs with discomfort. It's like this probably a watered down version of like how your alarm clock works. No matter what song or what sound or theme you pick for your alarm clock, you start to hate it very quickly. Same kind of concept, but not to that same extent in lifting, I would say, with music. So use it sparingly. Use it when you're feeling good. Use it if you need a little boost, but don't abuse it. So use it sparingly, maybe once or twice a week, and you'll feel great. Like a little backstory here, I've been traveling a lot. I just got back from Carolina, didn't lift at all, didn't listen to any music, and I was just vibing when I got back. Like I wanted to stay in the gym. The music was resonating with me. It felt sick. Like it was just cool. I was enjoying it. I was having a good time. And I realized I hadn't really felt that way in months because I listened to music or a podcast every time I lift. So taking time away from that allows it to become actually more useful. So having your baseline be silence, anything else becomes a boost rather than silence becoming a detriment and music being your baseline, or even a detriment if you start to associate discomfort and bad physical sensations with a certain song, and it kind of ruins that music for you too. Next question, how to deal with progressive overload as a byproduct, not what you chase. I discussed this very briefly in 2 questions ago. I would say here, I'll keep it kind of brief since I've touched on it already. Chase mechanical tension, train like you need to hit a PR next session, not this session. That's probably the biggest mindset I could ever say for something like this. It is very crucial. You want to chase the stimulus. The stimulus is your mechanical tension in the target muscle. Set yourself up for success here. Get your stability down, get your technique down, get your mindset down, get your exercise selection down, have your program set up properly, and you're golden. From there, train like you're trying to pack on size to PR that next workout. So for me, if I'm thinking I don't have to PR today, but I have to PR next week or the next time I do this movement, I'm going to pack on as much size and challenge my target muscle as much as I possibly can this session to create adaptations and come in just a little bit bigger to next session to be able to hit that PR. That's pretty much all you need. That goes a really long way. And of course, that next session doesn't really ever come unless you choose to test out your 1 rep max or choose to go hit a PR or something. You can kind of just say, all right, I'll do it for the next session every single session. Before you know it, you've chased stimulus and you've packed on a bunch of size, and now you're attached to that way of training because you've seen that it works. Next question. Why doesn't any influencer talk about work or stress when it comes to recovery? The quick answer here is because influencers don't work. What I'd actually say is that stress is inevitable, and stressing about your stress is very counterproductive. And you already see this happen a lot of the time where a lot of people start to worry about things like, oh, I'm worried my sleep isn't optimal, or I'm worried my diet isn't optimal, I'm worried about this, worried about my stress levels being too high. And it's like, can you not see like the irony of what's going on here? So chill out. Don't stress about every little thing. Training is still going to take care of 90% of your results. The rest is just making sure that you're generally living a healthy lifestyle and generally making sure you're stress-free. If you're worried about that or stressed about it, take a step back. You're taking things way too seriously. Don't get me wrong, it is serious. But when you take it that seriously, the stress starts to override your results. It's better to take a more relaxed approach, but seriously enjoy the benefits you get out of your training. That's what I'd say here. You should deal with stress. Finish your to-do list and give yourself time to truly relax. Spend time in the flow state doing things you enjoy. One of the biggest things that stresses people out is having that lingering thing on their to-do list that they're not taking care of. And I am like ADHD maxed out of my mind, and I am fixing it. So I get it. I know what it's like to have constant like laundry to fold, or something's always in the dryer. There's always something you have to do. Like I get it. You just have to find a way to get it done, because once things are done, you're able to actually sit there stress-free and truly recharge the battery and start to reset. So I get it, and I'm not perfect. I'm not trying to say like I have my routine down and I get everything done first thing in the morning and I'm like one of these hyper productive type A people. Like, I'm not really like that, at least to an extent. But when I do follow that type of mindset, which isn't all the time, it pays off. Next question. This is actually the last one. So this is from one of my clients, and he was like, dude, I think it's time to just refresh the masses on measuring progress. It seems like everybody's getting way too caught up in things like high volume or low volume or all these little variables, but they're forgetting to even measure their progress. They don't even know how to measure their progress in the first place. And ultimately, being able to measure progress is what sets you free. When you aren't able to objectively measure progress in the gym, you're always going to be chasing that basically shiny object. You're going to have that shiny object syndrome. So being able to measure progress allows you to genuinely test what's working. It takes a little bit of thinking, observation, and patience, but let's get to it. So stop worrying about training variables if you aren't measuring progress or giving yourself enough time to measure progress. If you aren't sure how to record progress, you have no business changing things up all the time. Don't change things up just because something might seem better. Change things up because what you're doing isn't working, and you can objectively articulate why that is. Measure your lifts. Basically from here, just general guideline. Generally speaking, add a rep to one of your sets for most lifts every week for beginners. And if you're an intermediate lifter, generally speaking, every 2 to 3 weeks, you should be adding a rep to one of your sets for most of your lifts. Of course, there's nuance to that. That is as summarized as I feel comfortable saying that. But that's generally what you want to strive for when you're measuring your results in terms of your actual program and the lifts that are in your program. Make sure you're generally recording these progressions, or at least putting the most stock into these on the lifts that are the most stable and the most detectable from point A to point B in terms of rep. Make sure your technique is very standardized, so something like a preacher curl always works perfectly. You're locked in, you can't cheat, keep your seat at the same height. There is a lengthened biased descending resistance profile, so when you actually complete the rep, you confirm you complete the rep. There's no tension at the top. It's not like a lateral raise where did you get all the way up to shoulder height? Don't worry about those lifts for now. Track them, but don't stress too much about them. Lifts like hinge variations, like your deadlifts, it's very obvious if you get a rep or not on deadlifts. Things like pressing variations, it's obvious if you get a rep on a press. All very important lifts to track. Those are going to be kind of like your money makers for assessing progression in the actual gym. I would also say progress in your phases with your body weight, your body fat percentage, your muscle measurements, these kinds of things. So your arm to waist ratio, that's an important one. Let's say you start off a bulk, your waist is 32 inches and your arms are 15 inches. Let's say you get to the end of the bulk, your waist is 34 inches and your arms are 16 inches. Say you cut back down, your waist is 32 inches, your arms are 15 and a half inches. That is an increase in your arm to waist ratio. That is a great sign of progress. Your waist measurement is generally going to standardize your body fat percentage. Your waist might grow very slowly over time, but generally speaking, if your arms are much bigger than when your waist was previously at that size, that is a great sign of progress. So take your waist measurements, take your arm measurements. I would also say your arm to body weight ratio is important too. This one does have a little bit more nuance to it, because if you add a bunch of muscle to other areas and you aren't prioritizing arms, then technically your ratio can worsen over time. But generally speaking, if you are 180 pounds and your arms are 15 inches, you bulk up to 190, get them to 16, cut back to 180 and your arms are 15 and a half. Great sign of progress, especially if you added muscle to other areas, since that is going to be an even leaner measurement on your arms, meaning that even more muscle had to replace the lost fat in that arm measurement. Next one here, waist to body weight ratio. If your waist is 32 inches at 180 and you bulk up to 190 and it gets to 34 inches, and then you cut back and your waist is 31 inches when you get back to 180, that means that you have less fat on your frame at 180, so the same weight, you're leaner. That means that you had to build muscle to get back up to 180. great sign of making progress. So these are all things that you can't necessarily detect progress on that much in the short term, but every 3 to 6 months, like those are your tests, like those are your deadlines. Think of those as like your midterms or your finals. Like that's a very overlooked aspect of detecting progress in the gym, I would say, or at least in your physique rather. When it comes to measuring your arms, you want to measure over the peak of your bicep, directly perpendicular to your humerus, and you want to be flexed as hard as you possibly can to standardize things. A lot of guys only half flex or partially flex. That leads to all sorts of fluctuations because you can't really standardize that. So flex as hard as you can, standardize that, do it in front of a mirror. That's what I'd suggest. When it comes to measuring your waist, flex your abs, don't suck in or push out. Flex your abs as hard as you possibly can. Exhale as much as you possibly can. Measure around the narrowest point of your waist. It's mostly standardizable. It's not going to be perfect, but take more frequent recordings and it will average itself out. Next one here, measure your body weight in the morning in your underwear. Of course, if there's people watching you, close the door. If you're bulking and gaining 1 to 2 pounds per month, or 0.5 to 1 kilos per month, aim to gain about 1/8 of an inch on your arms each month as a general rule of thumb. Don't take that like as verbatim, but generally speaking, that's a pretty good goal to shoot for most people. I'm not saying you can't do more. I'm not saying doing less means you're not making any progress. Generally speaking, if you're adding 1/8 of an inch to your arms each month and you're gaining 1 to 2 pounds a month, or half a kilo to a kilo each month, that's generally a good rate of progress for most people in most cases. So that's the Q&A. I'm going to leave it at that. If you have any questions or anything you want to see answered in the next one, keep an eye out on my Instagram stories. I do these maybe every couple months. You can submit your question there, and remember, only good questions, no bad questions. If a question is stupid, bad, dumb, whatever you want to call it, you're getting blocked and reported instantly. So that's it. I'll see you guys in the next one.